Gig cooks, I spy on menus, and 800 Degrees announces a huge Reef partnership. That's all ahead on this week's Monday Minute. Monday Minute works like this. We curate 5 key headlines from the last week and we give you our perspective on it. Shouldn't take long, so let's get started.
All right, Carl, the first one this week is for you. California AB 626 has passed, which allows home cooks to prepare meals for others out of their kitchens. What does this mean for the restaurant industry?
It's a really interesting area. It was passed earlier this month, Meredith. It's going to enable people to cook meals and at their permit-approved home kitchen for the purposes of off-premise delivery. It's known in some parts as the cottage food industry, but now there are marketplaces that are actually trying to work up this specific thing to really help restaurants, not restaurants, but actually home cooks get an alternative way of being able to make income. So what goes through my mind is it's almost like your neighbor being able to create a dish and be able to bring it over and charge you a fee for it. The actual marketplace that is in the news this week is something called Dish Divvy. And obviously, they're very excited about this particular news. They charge a 15% fee, and 85% of the actual total order then goes to the home cook. Now, there is one limitation with this particular legislation, and that is that you can only have 60 dishes prepared out of each kitchen each week. So for me, this is more of a gig cooking opportunity, if you will, as opposed to something where people are going to be creating mass restaurant volume through their own home kitchen. I think there are also a few health and safety things that people have to be mindful of, but there are inspections done. The kitchens can be inspected by both the authorities as well as the marketplaces. But I think it's an interesting one to watch out for. If it's successful, of course, in California, it could, branch out into other states. And if that happens, then I suspect the larger marketplaces, the DoorDashes and Uber Eats of this world, will take some attention towards it. Okay, so question 2 is Jonathan Mays, another one of his podcasts. We featured him last week, if you recall, Deeper Dive. They were talking about the struggle of independence and just the difference between them and the big chains. You listened to this podcast last week, and what was your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, it truly has been a tale of two recoveries where the big chains, particularly those big chains that have drive-thrus, have done actually quite well coming out of the pandemic. And the independents have continued to struggle. And there's a number of things behind this. One as simple as just the certainty as to whether or not something will be open, which Jonathan Mays talks about in the podcast. With a big chain, it's very reliable. If you go there, they're going to be serving food. With a small one, not so sure what they might have in stock. But it hits every single thing. When there's supply chain issues, the big chains are better able to ensure their supply. They do a lot of forward buying to ensure that they'll have enough supply across all of their fleet of restaurants. They're also able to more rapidly substitute out items if needed, whereas the small ones might be a little more spot buyers and therefore subject to whatever the market brings to them. But finally, and most importantly, there's a digital divide. And the big chains can afford to think through how they want to interact with their consumers digitally, whereas the small independents, in many cases, if they are putting in something digital, they're putting in just a piece, or they're relying on whatever software provider they go with to have a good solution. They're not doing a lot of customization. And this means that the big chains, many of which were investing in digital long before the pandemic came, are able to create a customized, frictionless experience for their guests, whereas the independents maybe don't have any digital way of connecting with their guests at all, or if they do, they're subject to whatever the platform they've chosen allows them to do. So for me, this is a really, really fascinating moment in our macroeconomic history, because independent restaurants are so important to the fabric of our communities. They're so important in terms of keeping dollars local and independent entrepreneurs and all of the people that they employ, that I'm hopeful these independent restaurants can find a way to get through this. But the National Restaurant Association recently surveyed a bunch of them. They said that The last 3 months have been harder than the 3 months prior. Jonathan Mays on the podcast refers to a statistic where independent restaurants have now taken on so much debt that it's starting to affect their credit scores. So there's a lot of scary things happening in that part of the industry. And I think that we're going to see some pretty radical change to address what's going on. So Amazon Prime and Deliveroo have teamed up for free deliveries over across the pond. So Carl, tell us, what do you make of this? And do you expect to see it over here in the US?
Well, it's a £25 minimum, so it's $40 more or less to be able to get access to Deliveroo Plus, which typically is about £3.50 a month or $5. And Amazon are not alone really in this kind of space. They've been, I think Nintendo Switch did something similar before with Deliveroo. But Amazon, did you know, they actually invested in Deliveroo a couple of years ago. They led I think it was the $575 million round. So they're kind of vested in making sure Deliveroo continue to find success over in the UK. I think for me, it's because of those limitations. I think it's more of a marketing play than anything particularly fundamental going on. I don't think we're going to start to see Amazon restaurants appear in the UK anytime soon. We know they tried in the UK, they tried in the US, and I think right now they're trying to make inroads into India. But for me, it's more of a marketing play. As for the US, obviously Amazon Prime is huge here as well. But I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't see the likes of Netflix or T-Mobile and various different other subscription-based monthly kind of costs be incorporated into a DoorDash or an Uber Eats in the future. And I think that could be really kind of interesting, because the more you remove the delivery component, the cost of delivery from the consumer's mindset, the more likely they are to order from those platforms more regularly, therefore driving frequency, which is one of the kind of key measures of success for platforms these days.
Yeah, I think that's right. And once you have that sunk cost of having paid the subscription, whether you're paying it directly to DoorDash or through some kind of partner, you think, well, I might as well. I've already paid for it, right?
Absolutely. Okay, so our fourth question is some exciting news. 800 Degrees have basically announced this week that they are teaming up with Reef with expansion plans of up to 500 additional units. What's happening here, and why should everyone be excited about this news?
Yeah, well, this is sort of the opposite news of what we just talked about with independents struggling. 800 Degrees is a relatively small brand. They don't have a huge footprint. And for them to suddenly go to 500 units is huge growth overnight. And I think it tells you about the way that independent restaurants can thrive going forward. As I understand the deal, it seems like Reef and 800 Degrees and Piestro, which is the robotic pizza making.
Piestro, Meredith. Piestro. I mean.
Piestro. Thank you. Thank you for channeling Massimo. I think that because the three of them together have come together to make this deal, what it tells you is there is a totally new and different way of being an independent and succeeding that is just fundamentally light years ahead and different from how we used to do it in the past. In the past, when you had one successful restaurant, you wanted to grow, you needed a lot of capital to do it. It was very tough. And now, if you have a great product like 800 Degrees does, and you want to get it out to more people, you can without building a restaurant, without hiring a whole bunch of people. And what this tells me is, as I alluded to earlier, if the independent restaurants are going to survive and even thrive, it's going to be in a fundamentally different business model from what it's been in the past. All right. And the last one here, TGI Fridays is the latest to announce eyeball tracking in your app so that they know what you're looking at. That sounds really futuristic. So tell us about what's happening and what restaurants can do with this technology.
Yeah, do you have one of these? I have one of these. I put it in front of, I don't know whether you can see that there, but it's a webcam protector. And some folks now are having those that they put in front of their cameras because they're concerned about people watching you as you explore whatever you're doing on your computer. And the same thing's happening on people's smartphones. Now, this isn't something that is mainstream yet. A company called Revenue Management Solutions and iMotions did a study with TGI Fridays where they looked at the way in which participants scanned a menu, the ordering journey, the way in which their spend patterns happened as a result of that ordering journey. And there were some really interesting things that came out of this. For example, 50% of the left side of the menu was typically ignored by those that were in this study. And so people typically read in a tea-based fashion. And I think as all the various different restaurant listeners that are thinking about how to redesign their menu for a smartphone or for a computer interface, need to be mindful of how their menu is designed for where consumers and guests are going to be looking. They learned that there were 4 key phases in the buyer's journey. Those were familiarization, exploration, affirmation, and confirmation. And really what they noticed was that in the exploration phase, that's the piece where people narrow down their choices, they evaluate them further. And the confirmation phase, which is where people are going through the checkout process, is in those 2 areas where people tended to change what they were choosing to purchase for food at that particular time. And so with those kind of insights, I think restaurants are going to be able to utilize that insight and be able to ensure they can improve the way in which their menu is displayed, the ways in which options that they're trying to promote get in front of the consumers that they're trying to promote towards. And while it's a little bit scary in the sense of data privacy, you can see the way in which this kind of technology can help restaurants make better decisions around their menu management.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, guys, that's it for another week. Hopefully you found this of interest. We'd love to hear from you what you think, whether you agree with us, whether you disagree with us. Please leave your comments below. Follow us on all the main social platforms, and we look forward to seeing you next week.